War films were supposed to build legends, not bury them. So how did some of Britain's most ambitious battle epics quietly destroy the very directors who made them? Behind the patriotic speeches and sweeping scores were financial disasters, studio panic, and careers that never recovered. Tonight we're uncovering the classic British war movies that didn't just miss the mark. They ended influence, access, and opportunity. And in one case, the fallout reshaped the industry itself. Number 12, The Charge of the Light Brigade, 1968. Director, Tony Richardson. By the late 1960s, Tony Richardson was not an outsider. He was respected, award-winning, a defining voice of Britain's new wave movement. His earlier successes had positioned him as one of the country's most intellectually ambitious filmmakers. Then he chose spectacle. The Charge of the Light Brigade was meant to be sweeping, ironic, and historically critical. A grand retelling of Britain's infamous Crimean War disaster. Richardson avoided patriotic gloss. Instead, he leaned into satire, bureaucracy, and aristocratic incompetence. It was visually bold, tonally unpredictable, expensive, and dangerously divisive. The production spiraled into controversy long before audiences saw a frame. Reports emerged of horses injured and killed during battle sequences. Animal welfare organizations condemned the film. Public outrage intensified. Laws were eventually strengthened in Britain regarding animal safety in film production. The press narrative shifted. Instead of anticipation, the film became associated with recklessness. Financially, it struggled. Audiences expecting a heroic war epic encountered biting political commentary and chaotic tonal shifts. Critics were split. Some admired its ambition, others saw indulgence. The box office did not rescue it. Studios grew cautious, and Richardson's reputation, once that of a bold modern voice, became tied to excess and miscalculation. Funding for large-scale projects grew harder to secure. His influence narrowed. The industry's trust cooled. He continued directing. But the momentum was different. Before this film, he was ascending. After it, he was negotiating. The irony is difficult to ignore. The historical event depicted in the film centered on mismanagement, overconfidence, and institutional arrogance leading soldiers into disaster. The production echoed that pattern. A director at the height of prestige, a costly gamble, a public backlash. The Charge did not just fail on screen, it changed how the industry viewed the man behind it. Number 11, Battle of Britain, 1969. Director, Guy Hamilton. This was supposed to be definitive. By 1969, large-scale war cinema was evolving. American epics dominated global screens. Old Britain needed its own aerial spectacle, something technically unmatched, nationally proud, and internationally viable. Battle of Britain promised exactly that. Director Guy Hamilton had credibility. He had handled scale before. The production assembled real aircraft, authentic locations, meticulous recreations. The logistics were enormous. The budget reflected that ambition. But scale does not guarantee emotional gravity. The film prioritized historical accuracy and aerial choreography. A dialogue often felt restrained. Character arcs were thin. The spectacle was undeniable. The intimacy was not. Audiences admired the planes. They did not return in large enough numbers. Financial expectations had been enormous. The box office response was respectable, but not transformative. For a film of that cost, respectable translated to disappointment. Studios noticed. Hamilton did not disappear from the industry, but something shifted. He became reliable rather than visionary, functional rather than defining. The opportunity to lead Britain's grand historical epics narrowed. In hindsight, the failure was subtle. There was no scandal, no on-set disaster, no public controversy, just numbers. In the post-60s market, war films needed either emotional intimacy or ideological edge. Battle of Britain offered disciplined recreation. It felt safe at a time when cinema was becoming volatile, and safe is expensive. The film did not collapse overnight, but its financial weight limited future appetite for similar British aerial epics. The scale that was meant to elevate Hamilton instead framed him as cautious. He continued working, but the crown of British war spectacle never settled on him. The sky was filled with aircraft. the silence afterward was quieter. Number 10. Oh, What a Lovely War, 1969. Director Richard Attenborough. This was not a modest debut. Richard Attenborough stepped behind the camera with scale, ambition, and an ensemble cast that could fill a studio's entire contract list. He was already a respected actor, trusted, bankable, established. Directing was supposed to be expansion. Instead, it became risk. Oh, What a Lovely War was adapted from a satirical stage musical about the First World War. Rather than solemn trenches and muted tones, Attenborough leaned into theatrical absurdity. Soldiers sang, generals were caricatured, casualties were juxtaposed against pastel seaside imagery. It was stylized, ironic, confrontational, and unsettling. British audiences were accustomed to dignified portrayals of wartime sacrifice. This film dismantled that dignity. It framed military leadership as incompetent, war as bureaucratic theater, death as arithmetic. Critics were divided. Some praised its audacity, others found it emotionally distant. Commercially, it underperformed relative to its scale and cast. Studios became cautious. Attenborough had gambled prestige on tone. Instead of earning immediate authority as a director, he encountered hesitation. Future projects required justification. Financing required negotiation. The industry viewed him differently. He was no longer simply a performer exploring direction. He was a filmmaker capable of polarizing national memory. Years later, he would rebuild, painstakingly, with projects of immense historical seriousness. But that recovery was slow. It required patience, reinvention, and distance from satire. Yet the debut did not end him, but it delayed him. And in an industry built on momentum, delay is costly. Number 9. Aces High, 1976. Director Jack Gold. By the mid-70s, British war cinema was no longer dominant. Audiences had shifted. The optimism of earlier decades had eroded. Vietnam altered global perceptions of military heroism. Cynicism replaced pageantry. Into that atmosphere came Aces High. Jack Gold approached the First World War with stark realism. The skies were not romantic. They were mechanical, impersonal. Young pilots were not fearless legends. They were exhausted boys cycling through survival. The film avoided glamour. It emphasized repetition, attrition, futility. Critically, it was respected. Performances were strong. The production was controlled and deliberate. But commercially, it stalled. The aviation spectacle could not compete with American blockbusters emerging at the same time. Nor did it offer the nostalgic reassurance some British audiences still expected from war dramas. It existed in between, too grim for comfort, too restrained for spectacle. The box office numbers did not justify expansion. Gold, already known for serious drama, found fewer opportunities for large-scale theatrical releases afterward. Television became steadier ground. His career did not implode, it narrowed. The industry recalibrated around directors who could either deliver international scale or intimate character-driven hits. Mid-budget British war films lost priority. Aces High became emblematic of that transition. A well-made film, a muted financial response, a signal that the era had shifted. And in shifting eras, some filmmakers adapt. Others are quietly repositioned. Gold continued working. But the runway for grand theatrical war cinema had shortened, and he was standing at its edge. Yes, number 8, The Bofors Gun, 1968. Director Jack Gold. It did not look dangerous on paper. A contained World War II drama, limited setting, strong cast, psychological tension instead of battlefield chaos. Adapted from a respected stage play, safe, controlled, manageable. But safety in concept does not guarantee security in career. The Bofors Gun confined its story to a British anti-aircraft unit stationed in isolation. The war itself is distant. The real conflict unfolds internally. Resentment, authority, boredom, humiliation. There are no triumphant charges, no swelling orchestras, no patriotic release. Instead, the film examines dysfunction within the ranks, power imbalances, quiet cruelty, institutional stagnation. It was not what mainstream audiences expected from a war film in 1968. Critics acknowledged its seriousness. Performances were measured, direction was disciplined, but box office traction was weak. International markets showed little interest. The film felt small at a time when spectacle was becoming dominant currency. For Jack Gold, this mattered. He was building a reputation for intelligent, restrained drama. But restraint is fragile when numbers disappoint. Studios evaluate directors not only by quality, but by reach. The Bofors Gun reinforced a perception. Gold could deliver seriousness, but not scale. That perception hardened. In an era when British cinema struggled to compete with American financing and global distribution, directors needed either commercial reliability or international appeal. This film delivered neither in measurable terms. Gold continued working, particularly in television and smaller theatrical projects. But the opportunity to command expansive war productions diminished. There was no public scandal, no controversy, no collapse, just a narrowing corridor. Thus, a film about confinement subtly confined its director. The irony is quiet, and in the film industry, quiet consequences are often permanent. Number 7. The McKenzie Break, 1970. Director, Lamont Johnson. The premise was straightforward. A World War II prisoner of war camp in Scotland. German officers planning escape. British intelligence countering from within. Tension, espionage, psychological maneuvering. It should have worked. Lamont Johnson was stepping into larger theatrical territory. Known for television direction, this was an opportunity to solidify credibility on the big screen, particularly within the British market. The cast included established names. The setting offered historical intrigue. The material was grounded in real events, but tone is delicate. The film leaned into atmosphere rather than urgency. Dialogue-driven exchanges replaced action. The pacing was deliberate, sometimes static. For audiences expecting suspense escalation, the energy felt restrained. Reviews were muted. Box office performance followed suit. The problem was not disaster-level failure, it was indifference. Studios measure indifference carefully. A loud failure can be repositioned. A polarizing film can attract cult longevity. But a film that leaves little imprint is harder to justify in budget meetings. Johnson's momentum stalled. He returned increasingly to television, and where his craftsmanship remained valued. But the opportunity to anchor major British theatrical productions diminished. The industry categorized him accordingly. Television director, capable, controlled, limited scale. The McKenzie Break did not implode careers across headlines. It quietly recalibrated one. In the ecosystem of British war cinema, already fighting for relevance in the early 1970s, this underperformance reinforced caution. Investors became selective. Directors were assessed conservatively. Johnson's trajectory adjusted downward in theatrical prestige, not erased, not disgraced, but repositioned. And in an industry defined by perception, repositioning can be as decisive as failure. Number 6. The Seawolves, 1980. Director, Andrew V. McLaughlin. On paper, this looks secure. A World War II mission, aging but recognizable stars. A true story involving covert sabotage in neutral territory. Familiar genre mechanics, structured heroism. It should have felt reliable. Andrew V. McLaughlin had built a career on sturdy adventure films and westerns. He understood pacing. He understood ensemble balance. He understood how to deliver masculine wartime camaraderie without excess. But by 1980, the market had changed. The Seawolves felt like a film from a previous decade. Its tone leaned toward old-fashioned heroics at a moment when war cinema had shifted toward grit and psychological realism. Then younger audiences were gravitating toward spectacle-driven blockbusters and modernized action. The film was not catastrophic. It was outdated. Critics described it as conventional, predictable, comfortable. In another era, that comfort might have worked. In this one, it translated into creative stagnation. Box office returns were modest. International impact was limited. Studios interpreted the results carefully. McLaughlin's brand, once dependable, now appeared dated. The appetite for traditional British wartime adventure was shrinking. Financing for similar projects became harder to secure. The shift was subtle but decisive. He continued directing, but large-scale theatrical influence diminished. His work moved toward television and smaller productions. The perception solidified. Capable craftsman, but not aligned with contemporary momentum. The war film did not explode. It faded. And sometimes fading is more damaging than collapse. And because collapse invites reinvention, fade invites replacement. Number 5, The Hill, 1965. Director, Sidney Lumet. This one was different. It was not about aerial spectacle, not about national pride, not about battlefield triumph. It was about punishment. The Hill examined a British military detention camp in North Africa during World War II. The enemy was not foreign soldiers. It was authority itself. Sidney Lumet approached the material with stark intensity. Brutal heat, psychological degradation, a relentless physical training mound. The Hill, used as disciplinary torment. The tone was uncompromising. It rejected patriotic framing. It exposed institutional cruelty. The war backdrop felt secondary to systemic oppression within the ranks. Critics respected its boldness. Performances were strong. The filmmaking was controlled and severe, but commercial performance was restrained. The subject matter unsettled audiences who still associated wartime narratives with honor. The film did not provide reassurance. It offered discomfort. For Lumet, the consequences were nuanced. He was an American director working within British settings. The film's financial moderation reinforced a growing perception that his strength lay in American urban dramas rather than British military stories. He pivoted back decisively to US-based projects. The Hill did not destroy his career, far from it, but it closed a chapter. His trajectory shifted firmly toward American legal thrillers, crime dramas, and moral confrontations. The British war experiment ended. In industry terms, that matters. Studios draw conclusions quickly. When a director delivers intensity but not scale returns, future investments adjust accordingly. The film remains respected, but it marked the limit of Lumet's involvement in British war cinema. The Hill inside the story represented institutional pressure. Outside the story, it symbolized something else, a line that, once crossed, narrowed future paths. Number 4, In Which We Serve, 1942. Director, Noel Coward. This one begins with triumph. In Which We Serve was released during wartime Britain. It was patriotic, controlled, designed to strengthen morale. The Royal Navy was portrayed with dignity and unity. Sacrifice felt noble. Leadership felt steady. The film succeeded. And audiences responded. Critics approved. The government endorsed its spirit. It became part of the wartime cultural effort. So, how could success damage a career? Because success can trap identity. Noel Coward was already a towering cultural figure, playwright, composer, performer. This film positioned him as a wartime storyteller, a patriotic cinematic voice, a symbol of national resolve. But that positioning narrowed him. Post-war British cinema changed. Audiences evolved. Themes darkened. Realism intensified. The appetite for moral clarity softened into ambiguity. Coward attempted further filmmaking. The momentum did not translate. He was increasingly viewed as emblematic of a previous era, a wartime spokesman rather than a post-war innovator. His directorial ambitions did not expand into sustained cinematic leadership. His influence returned primarily to theater and writing. In Which We Serve did not collapse his career. It defined it too narrowly. The war film elevated him in one context. But when the context shifted, the industry moved forward without him as a cinematic architect. Sometimes ruin is not scandal. Sometimes it is being fixed in time. Number 3, The Wooden Horse, 1950. Director, Jack Lee, A Prison Camp. A wooden vaulting horse, a concealed tunnel beneath routine exercise. The story was real. The wooden horse dramatized an ingenious escape from a German prisoner of war camp during World War II. It was tense, economical, grounded in authenticity. Jack Lee directed with discipline. The film avoided excess. It emphasized procedure, digging, concealment, risk. Audiences responded positively. The film performed respectably. It became part of Britain's post-war storytelling tradition. So, why include it here? Because sustained momentum did not follow. Lee did not convert this success into long-term directorial authority within major war productions. He continued working, Oh, but without escalating scale or expanding industry influence. The film industry in the 1950s was consolidating. Large studios sought directors capable of either delivering expansive epics or adapting to new global markets. Lee's reputation settled into competent realism. Competence is valuable, but it is not leverage. Over time, his name became associated with mid-level productions rather than defining cinematic events. The breakthrough never evolved into dominance. Yes, the wooden horse did not implode financially. It plateaued, and plateau can be a ceiling. The industry advanced toward widescreen spectacles, international co-productions, and star-driven marketing. Directors who could not expand with it found themselves gently repositioned. Lee's career reflects that shift: respected, reliable, gradually peripheral. The film remains remembered for its ingenuity. Its director became a footnote in the broader war cinema canon. Number 2. The Man Who Never Was, 1956. Director, Ronald Neame. The premise was almost unbelievable. A corpse dressed as a Royal Marine officer. False invasion plans placed carefully inside a briefcase. The body released off the coast of Spain, positioned to be discovered. German intelligence intercepting the documents, high command adjusting strategy based on a lie. Operation Mincemeat was not fiction. It was one of Britain's most calculated wartime deceptions. A plan built on detail, patience, and psychological precision. From the beginning, it carried cinematic gravity. When Ronald Neame committed to bringing it to the screen, the material already possessed tension. The task was not invention, it was control. The Man Who Never Was avoided melodrama. Neame structured the narrative like the operation itself: methodical, procedural, restrained. Scenes unfolded through paperwork, at forged signatures, coded communication, diplomatic maneuvering. Suspense did not erupt, it accumulated. Documents were drafted, identities were constructed. Officials debated risk in rooms thick with caution. The film carried quiet confidence. It did not need spectacle, it relied on plausibility. For a moment, it looked like ascension. The production was polished, the tone serious without excess. Critics acknowledged its craftsmanship. Audiences responded with steady approval. It held prestige without indulgence, the kind of measured success that signals reliability. But reliability and dominance are different currencies. Neame's background strengthened expectations. He had co-founded Cineguild. He had worked as a cinematographer under David Lean. He understood composition, discipline, structure. His resume suggested upward mobility within British prestige cinema. Yet, after The Man Who Never Was, the anticipated escalation did not arrive. Yes, the film succeeded, but it did not detonate internationally. It did not redefine the war genre. It did not become a cultural pivot point. It did not expand into spectacle. At the same time, the industry was shifting. By the late 1950s, British cinema increasingly depended on American distribution partnerships. Budgets were climbing. International markets dictated scale. Studios sought directors capable of commanding large epics or navigating cross-Atlantic financing structures. Neame's strength lay in precision, not magnitude. He did not fail. He plateaued. Number 1, Zulu Dawn, 1979. Director, Douglas Hickox. Some films suffer from failure, others suffer from comparison. Zulu Dawn faced both. By the late 1970s, British war cinema was already struggling to maintain its international influence. Budgets were tightening, American productions dominated global distribution, and historical epics required something increasingly rare: studio confidence. Financing a large-scale war film without strong international backing had become risky. Yet, despite those challenges, Zulu Dawn initially looked promising. The film dramatized the opening catastrophe of the Anglo-Zulu War, the Battle of Isandlwana in 1879. In that battle, British imperial forces suffered one of the most devastating defeats in colonial military history. The story offered natural cinematic scale, vast South African landscapes, thousands of Zulu warriors, and disciplined imperial formations, and a chain of command slowly collapsing under arrogance and miscalculation. On paper, it had all the ingredients of a sweeping historical epic. But the project carried a shadow that could not be ignored. 15 years earlier, Zulu had already become one of Britain's most iconic war films. That earlier production created a powerful cinematic template: heroic soldiers defending a remote outpost against overwhelming odds. It was confident, thrilling, and deeply embedded in British film culture. Zulu Dawn chose a very different perspective. Instead of heroic resistance, the film focused on institutional failure. Command misjudgments, political arrogance, and logistical mistakes gradually pushed British forces toward disaster. Director Douglas Hickox approached the material with seriousness and historical weight, emphasizing confusion and collapse rather than triumph. The cast was strong, the locations expansive, and the production attempted authenticity on a large scale. But audience expectations proved difficult to overcome. Viewers inevitably compared the film to Zulu, and those comparisons were rarely favorable. Where the earlier film delivered disciplined heroism, Zulu Dawn presented systemic breakdown. Where audiences remembered victory against impossible odds, this story ended in defeat. The tonal difference made marketing complicated. Critics responded cautiously, as some admired the ambition and historical detail, while others felt the film lacked emotional momentum. The spectacle was there, but it did not provide the mythic clarity audiences expected. Financially, the results were underwhelming. War films are meant to immortalize bravery, but behind the smoke and orchestral triumph were contracts quietly withdrawn, budgets denied, and directors who never regained the same authority again. These weren't just box office disappointments. They were inflection points, moments where ambition collided with industry patience. History remembers the battles on screen. The industry remembers the cost of it. And sometimes, the final casualty isn't the character.